So let's just talk about the money. So this morning I kind of ended with the tax credits, which is one way to finance these projects. Granted, we don't get the tax credit until after the project is built, but it can certainly serve as a form of assurance or collateral for a loan or other ways of financing your projects, and then it just comes as in the form of effectively a rebate. But as I'd also mentioned, under elective pay, we can we can combine both grants and tax credits. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the major sources of funding that are available for us now for community solar projects. So I'll start first with the bipartisan infrastructure law. So this was passed back in 2022. It's a 5-year program. And so they are already through year 2. This year, now that we've got our full year appropriations and everybody can get to work, they're going to be issuing year 3 money. And so we'll have year 3, 4, and 5 left to go. Some key programs where we can use funding for either some or parts of our community solar projects include the energy improvement for rural and remote communities. So this was a $1 billion program. The Department of Energy has already spit out about $400 million, so they still have another $600 million to go. They have 2 types of programs in their larger grant. They have programs that will fund projects that are greater than 5 megawatts, and then they have a separate program that will fund projects that are less than 5 megawatts. So again, depending on the size of your community solar, you might look to that program when they come out with their next round of funding as a source of funding. They've pretty much designed this for no cost share requirements, but you're not going to get all of the money that you need anyway, so you're still going to have to come up with some extra cash. The grid resiliency program, I want to point out, is not really for solar generation, so you can't use that money for the solar panels, but you can use it for other aspects of a microgrid, if you're going to try and do a microgrid type project, and batteries. And that's really more resiliency. It's intended to support the little grid. So if you find, for example, that in order to do the community solar project, I've got to upgrade my wires. I need to need to go from 69 kV up to 115 to have more capacity. Then you can actually use the grid resiliency money to improve the little grid, the wires of the little grid, which many of us will need anyway. Every tribe has an allocation under the Formula Grant Program. So I encourage the Pueblos to take a look at what your allocation is. That money is available. Actually, you have until 2 weeks from today to apply for the 3rd year, but there will be year 4 and year 5 under the Grid Resiliency Formula Grant. The state of New Mexico also has an allocation. I'm not sure what they're doing with it, but that might be another area to look at, again, for reinforcing the grid on the Pueblo so that you can put the community solar project in. There's also what's called a transmission facilitation program. This is really more for big transmission, but if you decided as part of your project planning to kind of link all of your projects together, you might be able to use the transmission facilitation program for the generation tie lines and the grid tie lines, if you will, to physically connect your projects. And then home energy and electrification rebate program, not specific to community solar, but one of the things that the energy people will tell you is you need to make your homes more energy efficient. And of course, we're getting into electrification. And you should do that before you figure out how much load you're going to actually have. So if you have like a more holistic program of we're going to go ahead and electrify all our homes, or as many as we can, make them more energy efficient, then we'll know what our residential demand will be, and then I size my community solar project for that. So you might take a look at that program to do that work, get your homes electrified, get them more energy efficient, before you actually design your community solar program. The Department of Interior also has a tribal home electrification program. They've just put about half of that money on the street. They got $145 million. The DOE, $225 million is available right now. Every tribe has an allocation. So I encourage you to go see what your allocation is for the DOE program. The DOI program is a competitive program, so they will hopefully have another round later this year. Electric vehicle infrastructure, again, I raise this because the electric vehicle charging stations could be an off-taker of your community solar project. If I'm out kind of a little bit more in the hinterlands, and I'm not sure I need to run brand new electric lines to an EV charging station bank, maybe I just connect them, I put them near the solar project. So you can take advantage of trying to do maybe electric vehicle charging infrastructure at the same time you're doing your community solar. Why? Because that's more load. So I need to know if I'm doing that, and I might want to go ahead and get that done and paid for by the Department of Transportation. USDA also has two programs, the Rural Energy for America program, which is a combined grant loan program. They got $2 billion for that under the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's a quarterly application process. It's as you need it, you file your application for the quarter. Every quarter, they make the awards. They will go, it's a 50% grant, so the most, if you have a $1 million project, the most you'll get out of them is $500,000, and then you borrow the rest from them. And that's good, because then you have a grant loan program combined. You don't have to go find financing for the rest. And then, of course, your tax credit you'll go get to pay off the loan. So REAP is a kind of this nice design package of grant plus loan to do projects. The RUS $1 billion forgivable loan program, that actually unfortunately closed at the end of last year. We're still waiting to see if there will be any availability after they work their way through the people who applied in the first place and maybe got awards. But the forgivable loan program, if it comes back, is for tribes a 60% forgivable loan. So you could use that loan if it becomes available in the future to build your project, and the USDA will forgive 60% of your loan. And then, of course, the tax credit takes care of the rest. And then finally, the EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $27 billion. Yesterday, they announced the awards for $20 billion of that $27 billion. There is an organization called the Native CDFI Network, which is the kind of industry association for the native CDFIs. They got $400 million of Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund money to invest in clean energy projects in Indian country. So if you're looking for financing, maybe the first place we go is a native CDFI who will have money from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to lend into your project, bridge loan, or maybe longer term. But that $27 billion, the $20 billion is intended to be loans or other investments. So it won't be free money to us if we need to use that money. We'll have to repay it. Some of those loans will be forgiven. I think there's another organization that's committed 10% of their money, which is about $700 million. They got a $7 billion bucket. They've committed $700 million to Indian country. So, and they've already said that for loans up to $10 million, they will forgive 60% of the loan. So similar to the RUS program. So as those programs start getting rolled out, it'll be another few months for that. But as those programs start getting rolled out, pay attention to who got this $20 billion, because they will be a source of capital. The $7 billion is for Solar for All. And I'll talk about that in a little bit of detail in a minute, because this is really going to be where you get a bunch of free money for your projects. And then the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant is a $5 billion program, $300 million set aside for tribes, although tribes can compete for the rest. In order to get that money, though, you had to have done a climate action plan and then a full-scale climate resiliency and adaptation plan. So if you didn't apply to the EPA for climate, what we just call climate planning money, and only about 225 tribes applied, so I don't know if any Pueblos in the room applied. If you did, you're eligible for this implementation money. If you didn't apply for the planning grant, you're not eligible for this money. So I would maybe check to see if this is something you'd be eligible for. Okay, let me talk a little bit more about Solar for All, because this is coming down the pipe. There are about 3 or 4 big intertribal organizations, including GRID, which is not a tribal, but nonprofit that has their tribal energy program, who have applied for Solar for All money. GRID applied for New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Utah, and California, their tribal energy program. So they asked for enough money to cover all the tribes in those states. Why? Because you guys didn't get your act together. So there was no intertribal organization in any of those states that applied for the Solar for All money for the tribes. The states applied. New Mexico applied. They've, as I understand it, have claimed they're going to give you some money, but we'll see. Same with Arizona. They said, we'll do a set-aside. California said, we'll do a set-aside if they get the money. But GRID did ask for enough money to cover all the tribes in those states. There are some other organizations that purportedly did a national program, but we'll see if they get any money. So what is Solar for All? I encourage you, next Tuesday, there's a webinar series starting on Solar for All. If you're interested, let me know. I'll send you the link for it. It's about a 1 hour, and it's going to be a series of webinars that really helps educate tribal leadership and staff on what Solar for All is. And the reason why we're doing it, one, we expect the Solar for All awards to be announced hopefully in the next 30 to 45 days. 2, it's a very limited use of the funds. There's lots of confusion by people of what they can use this money for. So it's literally only residential solar. So it's rooftop solar or it's community solar that's facing residential ratepayers. And at least half of the community solar project has to face residential. So even though in New Mexico you're under the Community Solar Act, you don't have to have a residential component at all. If you want Solar for All money to pay for your project, it has to be half residential. So funding, though, can be used for financial assistance, which will include subgrants. So what will happen is the money will come, let's say GRID gets their money. The money will come to GRID from EPA, and then you, the tribe, will apply to GRID to get your money. And then they'll base that on your project, how much money you need, how much money they have. So we'll see what their final, if they get the money, what their final program looks like. But they can set it up as grants, as rebates, as other incentives. If you had tribal members who own their own homes, and they want to get a grant to do a rooftop solar. And remember, they get a 30% tax credit, too. So you can set up a program for the tribal members to get Solar for All money to help buy their solar projects. Or you can use it for your tribal housing, your rental housing that the tribe might own. Also can be used for project deployment technical assistance. So a lot of tribes need project help, right? We need technical help. We need help interacting with the utility. We need help with understanding what the rates are. We need help maybe with financial analysis. So the project deployment technical assistance covers that, including workforce development, customer engagement. There's going to be a huge effort to reach out to every tribe, educate them that this money is available, and here's how you get it. So there's going to be a lot of customer engagement, and then some of it for project admin. But again, eligible projects limited to residential rooftop or community solar that benefits low-income residents, which they say low income, but every tribal community is considered eligible. So whether you're low income or not, doesn't matter. You're still going to be eligible. Some of the money can be used for other enhancements, right? So a lot of times people go, we can't do rooftop solar because our roofs are horrible. Maybe you have old HUD housing, or we have old Pueblo housing, and I've got to shore up the roof. So you can use some of the money to do that, fix your roof structures. If I've got old wiring, you can use some of the money to rewire the house or to buy bigger wiring boxes because I might need to upgrade my electrical boxes, so you can use some of the money for that. But you have to show that they're going to provide meaningful benefits, which typically is energy savings, cost savings. So if I can save at least 20% on my electric bill, that's going to be a meaningful benefit. We have 5 years to spend this money. So we're hoping that Indian country will get, I think we added up all the intertribal orgs, there's $7 billion in total. We're hoping that we get at least 700 million into Indian country. 10%. That was the goal. People are trying to coordinate with each other to make sure we had the whole country covered, and we got at least 10% of the $7 billion. So it's a lot of money that has to be spent in 5 years. And then Pete's money, as I call it, the Native CDFI network, they got $400 million. So that's $1.1 billion. And then other people have committed money. So we're looking at pretty close, out of the $27 billion, we're estimating at least $2 to $2.5 billion of that Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund will come into Indian country, or at least be committed to coming into Indian country. And this is the CCIA, so just, again, this is a loan program. The money will filter down into the native CDFIs or other community lenders. They will, in turn, lend the money to you for your project. You can use their money, again, combined with your Solar for All money. So maybe I'm doing a $2 million project. I go ask for $1 million in Solar for All. I go to Pete's Native CDFI. I go, I need a $2 million loan to build the project. I'm going to get $1 million from Solar for All, and then I'm going to get a tax credit for the other 50%, and now I got a free $2 million project. And you're going to pay back Pete's guy, the Native CDFI. They're going to keep relending the money. So this is intended to be combined with the Solar for All. It's also intended to be combined with tax credits. And Solar for All is intended to be combined with tax credits. The EPA very clearly says we expect you to leverage tax credits and other funds for these projects. So their EPA, at least, is encouraging us to get as much money as we can, especially free money, to do these projects. And Pete's guys, the CDFIs, have 6 years to get this money out the door. The nice thing about this program, though, is it can be broader than just solar and residential solar. So if you were going to do a community solar project that doesn't face houses at all, maybe it faces your casino or your government building, you can use Pete's money to do that. Now, it's a loan, so you got to repay it. It might be a forgivable loan or a partially forgivable loan. But this money can be used for commercial, what I would call commercial community scale solar. It can also be used for doing energy efficiency in your buildings, can be used for electric vehicle transportation. If you want to change out your cars and buy a bunch of EV cars, you can use this money for that. Other distributed clean energy. Again, if you were going to, say, build a community solar and add some more batteries and a microgrid and maybe some backup power, you can use Pete's money for that. Can't use the Solar for All money for that, but you could use Pete's money for that. So these are just ways to create that capital stack. And then quickly, I just call these the other federal programs. So they just got appropriation for fiscal year 24. So I've updated these numbers with either their current appropriation or their new appropriation. So the Office of Indian Energy, they actually have a $50 million notice of funding opportunity out right now. Applications due at the end of May. It was $25 million, then they got their appropriation. They got appropriated $75 million this year by Congress, so they upped their grant to $50 million. End of May due date. The Weatherization Assistance Program is another program that some of your housing authorities look at this, but you can use that funding to do energy efficiency and rooftop solar. There's an effort to allow folks to use weatherization assistance funds for community solar. And as an example, HHS, which runs the LIHEAP program, just approved using LIHEAP funding for community solar. So in the subscription model, remember the ratepayer buys in, pays a subscription rate. Now what HHS has said, you can use LIHEAP funding to pay the subscription for low-income customers. So now the low-income customers who would otherwise have to pay a subscription fee, and then of course that reduces their cost savings, now if they're eligible for LIHEAP, the LIHEAP money can pay the subscription fee. REAP, as I said, is quarterly. Their deadline is every quarter. They didn't get any new money in 2024 because they got $2 billion a couple of years ago. So Congress is waiting for them to make their way through that. RESPA is another program that the co-ops can use. And I don't know if any of your co-ops take part in RESPA, but co-ops are able to go to USDA, get 0% money, and relend it to their ratepayers or their members. RESPA is one of the programs. They would basically re-lend you money to do energy efficiency, and you can include rooftop solar in that. And you would repay your co-op, usually through on-bill financing. So you might, pay them an extra $20 a month for the project. Of course, hopefully you're saving $40 or $50 a month in your electric bill. So that might be something to go to your co-ops with as a way to, again, build out rooftop solar or community solar using cheap USDA money. ICDBG, they just got $1 billion in the ICDBG program. So that's an annual application. That money can be used for a whole bunch of things. And then finally, the EDA, Commerce's EDA, Economic Development Administration, they have a program called the Public Works Grant Program. It's typically for feasibility studies, SEDS, pre-design engineering, pre-construction work, and construction. And now they're getting into the energy business. So there's a tribe out in Arizona that just got a $5 million EDA grant to build a 10-megawatt solar project. It'll pay for about half of it. So that's another place we can now go. They got $100 million. They got billions of dollars through COVID. So they're still working through their COVID money. But they just got another $100 million in this current appropriation. That's, again, typically a semi-annual application period. Don't forget to look at the state. I don't know, New Mexico, you guys have, I think, through your Indian Affairs Department, you get a capital improvement, right? The state gives you money for roads and infrastructure and stuff. Are they starting to give you money for clean energy? Some? So another source of income, another source of grant is here at the state. Your utility might have rebates. I don't know if PNM has a rebate program. Sometimes they do, as another way to pay for things. You're probably not eligible. I think New Mexico had a small state tax credit for renewable energy, 10% or something, or $1,000 or something like that. So you probably wouldn't be eligible for that, but that might be something if you're thinking about kind of a legislation to promote more clean energy, would be for the state of New Mexico to do for you vis-a-vis tax credits what the feds have done, which is let a tribe apply for a tax credit from the state and we'll write them a check instead of a tax payment. So you have a model that might be helpful for getting more state money. And then philanthropy. So you had Grid Alternatives up here. There's an organization called the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. They're frantically trying to pull together a $100 million development fund that will help tribes with the development costs. Right? So PNM was talking about the interconnection costs and not just the hardware costs, but the study costs. Somebody's got to pay for those studies that have to be done. That's you. That's you. You have to pay for it before you can interconnect to them. Now, if it's easy, then it doesn't cost you much money. But if it's a bigger project, it could cost you a lot of money. You have other development costs, right? You might have to go do environmental analysis. You might have to do cultural surveys, depending on where you're putting your project. You certainly have to do some pre-engineering and design work. And all of that money's got to be paid for your project to be bankable and shovel-ready. And you've really got to basically get through all of that before, frankly, you even should be applying for a grant. Because grant money won't cover that cost. There's no federal grant that covers development costs. They will pay you to build the project, so you got to be ready to build it. So some of these folks in philanthropy now flocking to Indian country, trying to help with this kind of gap we have, the development cost gap. So pay attention to what philanthropy is up to. Okay, I talked a little bit about residential energy efficiency last time. So here's just an example of putting it all together. So community solar, wind, plus storage, less than 5 megawatts. Right? Remember, we had our less than 1 megawatt, 1 to 5, 5 or more. So this one's less than 5 megawatts, probably something you're going to do here. Let's say it costs you $15 million, $3 a watt. That sounds about right for New Mexico. So my tax credit's somewhere between 30 and 70%, right? If I can stack them all. I get my prevailing market wage, I get my energy community, which apparently you guys are all in an energy community. I get my domestic content. I get my, if it's Indian land, only 10% more, so 60. If it's residential facing, then it's 70%, another 20%. So Uncle Sam the Treasury will write you a check, if you're like just do the bare minimum, 30%, will write you a check for $4.5 million after you file your tax return. Or Uncle Sam will write you a check for $10.5 million. Did I do that math right? I think I used my calculator for that. So the different types of grants we have. So the DOE, Office of Indian Energy, they've upped their grant limit to $5 million. So if I got a $15 million project, I get a $5 million grant from the Office of Indian Energy, and then Uncle Sam Treasury writes me a check for $10 million. Zero. My $15 million project has cost me nothing. And now I'm doing nothing but saving money, right? I don't have to repay anybody. I don't have to pay any of those costs. If I go through USDA REAP, I do have a limit, $2.5 million between grant loan. So the grant pays off, so I might still have some money left over. If I use the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and I go to Solar for All, and they go, here you go, here's money. We don't know what the grant limits will be yet, so this is just an illustrative example. But again, another zero. Or I go to the EDA Public Works, and I get a $5 million grant. Again, zero. So lots of opportunity in your 5 megawatt or less because of those plus-ups. The 10% or the 20% starts getting you to a place where, given the typical average grant that we'll see out of the Office of Indian Energy or EDA, again, we don't know what Solar for All will be, or REAP, so those are typical numbers, we've got zero costs or minimal costs. Where we do still have some costs left over, well, I can go to Tribal Energy Loan Guarantee Program, get 3% money. Well, I think it's 4% now. So you can't borrow from anybody for 4%, except the feds. So I can go to the feds and get 4% money all day long, which is as cheap as you can get, and might be well worth it to have a $2 million loan to be able to save a bunch of money. That'll be paid off in a minute, depending on how much savings you have. If I have a microgrid example, again, less than 5 megawatts, they're a little bit more expensive. So $35 million is about the price of a microgrid in California. I don't know what the price will be here. But similar type of circumstance, same basic percentages, especially if it's facing residential. DOE money is still going to be limited. Again, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So I still have some money left over that I'm going to have to borrow. But depending on how I structure it, I might not have to borrow much. I might be able to get away with only owing $500,000 on a $35 million project. And then finally, if I did rooftop solar, let's call it less than a megawatt, because that's likely, and we'll call it $2 million. That's probably a little low, so might be a little bit more than that. But again, residential, so I'm going to be somewhere between 30 and 70%. I don't need as much money from DOE. I can go use my HUD ICDBG money now comes into play as an option, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, but I'm structuring that grant amount so that I get zero. Because remember, grant plus tax credit can't be more than the cost of the project. So a lot easier to go ask DOE for $1 million than to ask them for $5 million. So one of the things that I always tell people to think about now is when you're looking at your grant, and let me kind of explain how this is going to work in the elective pay scenario. I told you they made some changes in the final rule. What they said was originally, grant plus tax credit can't be more than your cost. Excuse me, and the grants were federal grants, state grants, philanthropic grants, all those three sources of capital. Now what they're saying, what they've said in the final rule is the grant that you go get has to be specifically for the construction, reconstruction, renovation, or purchase of the energy property. That's the term, energy property. Has to be specifically for it and only for it. So if you go get an ICDBG grant, which you can use that money for anything that's within ICDBG. You can use it for energy efficiency, you can use it for rooftop solar, you can use it to fix the house up, right? Do some structural repairs, etc. So if you put in your grant for ICDBG and you go, we want $2 million and we're going to use some of it for roof repairs and some of it for energy efficiency and some of it for rooftop solar. because that grant is not specific to just the rooftop solar, that grant doesn't count. Doesn't count at all. So you actually will get the grant plus the tax credit, and you will, in fact, make money on it. So that's what they have now told us we can do. So I encourage grant writers and the folks looking at grants for your source of capital to expand the purpose of your grant. Don't limit it to just the energy project. Expand it as much as possible for two reasons. One, you only get the tax credit on the energy property. So you don't get it on your development costs. You get it on your interconnection costs, but not on your studies. So you're going to have a lot of other costs, call them the development costs, that you don't get the tax credit on, but that you're paying for to do your project. So you only get the tax credit on the project and other parts of the project that are integral. So when you're looking at a grant, look at it more broadly. Look for grants that will help you cover your development costs, that will help you cover some of your interconnection costs, that won't be paid for by the tax credit, or other parts of the cost of the project, like your jobs, your salaries, right? Your overhead. You got to pay project managers. Hopefully you're hiring project managers to help you do this. You don't get to get a tax credit on their salary, but you can get a grant for their salary. So the broader you write this grant, for the broader amount of things that you're doing, the more likely you don't have to count the grant when you're calculating your tax credit. Consult with your tax attorney. So these are just some examples of how we would put all this together and literally walk away with $10 million, $15 million projects and not owe a dime, and basically be able to do them for free. Okay, that's all I have. So let's go get some money. Thanks. Oh, happy to answer any questions. Sorry. Any questions? No? I know. It's Friday late. I was early. I'm early. You guys have a good one. Thanks.